As James Turner sat in LaGuardia Airport in New York, he couldn't help but feel that it wasn't the most pleasant way to spend an evening. He watched the boarding process for what he hoped would be his flight back home to Charlotte. James, along with his two sisters, owned a small pharmaceutical company that their father had created decades earlier. The father had developed a series of valuable but rarely used drugs, making the company profitable but offering little growth opportunity. With both parents passed, James had spent the last few days in New York negotiating the sale of the company to a big pharmaceutical concern. Today, James had reached a deal with his lawyers and brokers, leaving them to finalize the contract negotiation. James hoped he would get home tonight, but it looked doubtful. The last flight of the day to Charlotte was fully booked, and he was third on the wait list. He hadn't called his wife Polly because he wasn't sure what to tell her. Sitting at a bar where he could watch the gate, he drank his second gin and tonic, thinking about the deal and the money he and his sisters would share. Over $10 million for him, plus a well-compensated transition period with the big pharma company, meant a new lifestyle for him and Kyle. Their twin girls were already out of the nest, or at least on their way. Both were attending college, juniors at Duke, where the tuition was eating him alive. But that would all change when the pharma deal closed. Meanwhile, the boarding process was finishing, and the gate agents were ushering the last passengers into the jetway. Then, a bit of a miracle happened. The boarding sign changed, and James saw his name appear as having cleared the wait list. He tossed money on the bar, gave the bartender a thumbs up, grabbed his briefcase and overnight bag, and sprinted to the gate. The gate agent handed him a boarding pass and quickly explained to him and two other waitlisters at a party of 4 who had checked in remotely had failed to show up, so they got the seats. James ran down the jetway with his new companions, arriving at the boarding door to find out he had gotten a first-class seat. A good sign, he thought. Cleared the flight, sitting in first class, maybe home a day early. Maybe that meant the pharma deal would really close. As the boarding door closed and he settled into his seat, the flight attendant asked if he wanted something to drink as they taxied to the runway. Feeling like he had earned it, he ordered another G&T, then drifted off to sleep, dreaming of a future for him and Polly with enough money to always fly first class. The jolt and screech of landing stirred him from his sleep. Disoriented, he stumbled his way to the taxi stand, too exhausted and a bit tipsy to consider retrieving his pickup from the airport parking lot. It was far too late to ask Polly to come get him. They lived a few miles outside of Charlotte. The taxi ride was long enough for him to doze off again, only waking when they reached home. James paid the driver generously and stumbled out of the cab, feeling sluggish. It had been a long, stressful day and half the night. All he wanted now was to snuggle into bed with Polly. As he turned toward the house, something caught his eye and snapped him fully awake. A gold-colored Mercedes was parked in the driveway, blocking his side of the garage. To James, it looked like a very fancy car, but then any Mercedes would seem fancy to him. The house was dark, well past midnight. James stood frozen for a few moments. He had talked to Polly from his lawyer's office earlier in the day, and she hadn't mentioned any overnight guests. He tried to push away the unsettling thoughts, hoping for a happy ending that involved cuddling with Polly, but his mind wouldn't cooperate. Slowly, he made his way to the door in the breezeway between the garage and the house, unlocked it, and entered the silent house. Moving through the kitchen and up the stairs to their bedroom, James felt a leaden weight settle in his chest. The bedroom door was ajar, a sign that they weren't expecting him. He stepped inside and felt himself shut down. His brain stopped functioning, his breath caught in his throat, and it seemed even his heart paused. The unthinkable sight before him paralyzed him. Polly was fast asleep, sprawled on her side of the bed, her arm draped over another man, who was also asleep and wearing a slight smile. James stood there, time stretched out endlessly. Eventually, his brain started working again. He looked at Polly, seeing her holding the other man, both of them snoring softly. It shattered him. He had always loved Polly's snoring, finding it comforting, almost like a soft purr. He used to drift off to sleep, feeling safe in her presence, but now that sound would haunt him. He realized he would never hear it again, never fall asleep beside her. Despite the pain in his heart, James began to think more clearly. He noticed the man's neatly folded clothes on a chair where he had often sat himself. A smoldering fury ignited within James. He grabbed the pants, extracted the wallet and car keys, then paused to consider his options. He could lash out at the man, whom he now dubbed asshole, with a tennis racket from the bedroom closet. Or he could have done the same to Polly. Both actions, though satisfying momentarily, could spell trouble in the long run. Another plan started to form. He pulled out his cell phone to snap a few incriminating photos as the idea took shape. Once he finished taking pictures, James gathered Ashwell's clothes and shoes. Ashwell was a big guy, much larger than James. Standing at 5'10" and weighing about 160 pounds, James realized a tennis racket might not be a wise choice, even in the short term. With Ashwell's belongings in hand, James took one last look at his wife, his once beloved wife, the mother of his precious daughters, and steeled himself against the love that had sustained him for over 2 decades. Without shedding a tear, he left the bedroom, descended the stairs, and stepped outside. The key fob unlocked the Mercedes, and James placed his briefcase and overnight bag inside before settling into the driver's seat. He had never been a connoisseur of fancy cars, but as he sat in the Benz, he found himself appreciating it. After figuring out the controls, he shifted into gear and drove off. A mile down the road, James pulled over to inspect Ashwell's wallet. It contained the usual items, some cash, business cards identifying Ashwell as Nick Peterson, a senior sales associate at a local Mercedes dealership, and a driver's license showing an address in Charlotte. If Ashwell had a family there, James mused, he could cause some real trouble, both for Ashwell and possibly for Polly. However, James was exhausted, so he decided to head for a nearby motel and get some rest. Polly Turner, a meticulous woman, knew she wasn't as intellectually sharp as her husband James. However, her attention to detail had allowed her affair with Nick Peterson to continue for nearly 5 months without James suspecting a thing. As she lay in bed the next morning with Nick, she pondered over the situation. James was still in New York, she presumed. Too much of a car salesman, she thought, deciding it was time to end the affair. She enjoyed Nick's imposing presence, reminiscent of the football players she dated in college, but his increasing possessiveness was a concern. Allowing him to spend the night was a mistake she wouldn't repeat. She intended to spend her life with James, and though he would never know about Nick, having another man in their bed was too disrespectful. She turned to Nick, but suddenly the alarm clock interrupted her thoughts, ringing at 7 in the morning. Today, she resolved to call Nick and end things gently but firmly. Polly dressed and headed for the shower. As she returned to the bedroom, Nick emerged from the guest room with a towel wrapped around his waist. "Polly, where did you move my clothes?" he asked. "What? I didn't move them anywhere. Where did you leave them last night?" "Right there, on that chair, but they're gone." "Did you take them into the guest room with you? They must be here somewhere." Nick mumbled, walking back down the hall to check, only to return a moment later. "No, they're not there. They're not here, there." His voice trailed off as he struggled to understand the disappearance of his clothes. "Did you leave them downstairs when we came in last night?" Polly asked impatiently, recalling their heavy drinking the evening before. "No, I'm sure I didn't, but I'll go look," Nick replied, leaving the bedroom. He returned quickly, rushing up the stairs. "Polly, my car is gone. My clothes aren't downstairs. Someone was here last night. They took my clothes. They stole my car." "Damn, what's going on?" "What? How?" Polly tried to make sense of Nick's words. How could his clothes and car disappear when they had been in the house all night? Could someone have broken in? Suddenly, Polly collapsed onto the bed. "What's wrong?" Nick asked, concerned. Polly struggled to respond, her breathing labored, making it difficult to speak. "Nick, what if it was James?" she finally suggested. "What if he came home from New York while we were sleeping? What if he took your stuff and your car?" "Oh damn," Nick muttered as he collapsed onto the bed next to Polly. "You need to find out where he is. If it was him, well, that's one thing. But if he's still in New York, that means some burglar broke in. And that means we need to call the cops." I have to get my stuff back and my car. Ah, shit, that car. If we call the cops, they'll want to know who owns it, and it's titled in my wife's name. For some goddamn tax reason, His voice trailed off as he contemplated a future that might range from just bad to absolutely disastrous. I'll call his office. His secretary comes in really early, and she'll know where he is. Polly pulled out her phone and dialed James's office. Even though it wasn't quite 8 o'clock, James's secretary answered immediately. James Turner's office. May I help you? Hi, Stacy. This is Polly. I know it's really early, and I'm not sure where James is. He didn't call last night, so have you heard from him? Polly, it is early, and I know the team in New York worked really late last night. They probably are getting a late start today. I talked to James about 6 yesterday, just before I went home. He said they were making good progress, and they might have a deal today. That's good news. So he's still in New York, right? Yes, I'm pretty sure he is. I expect to hear from him once they're all back at the lawyer's office. Do you want me to ask him to call you? Yes, please, but only if he has the time. I understand how crucial this deal is. Sure thing. Bye then. They ended the call, and Polly turned to Nick. James is still in New York, so we should consider calling 911 to report a break-in and a car theft. Polly, what's the plan? Do we tell them that your lover's clothes were stolen from your bedroom and his car from your driveway? We're in deep trouble. All right, I see your point. Let's brainstorm. How about I drive you to your place, you change into some clothes, and then report the thefts as if they happened there while your wife was taking the kids to school. We can skip mentioning the stolen clothes, explaining that would be tougher than a stolen car. Yeah, but I already told my wife I was in Atlanta yesterday for a meeting about the new Mercedes S-Class, and I won't be back until this afternoon. Okay, but the plan still holds. We just wait until maybe noon, when you would be getting back anyway. You stopped by home, left the keys in the car since it was a quick stop before you went to the dealership, and your car got hijacked while you were in your house. You know, I think that might work, and I could say I left my wallet in the car, and they took that too. And we can hang out here for a few hours, maybe end up needing another shower, maybe together. Nick, okay, yeah, I need to call into work to take a sick day. Polly worked as a paralegal at a small law firm. The work was okay, if a little boring. She stepped into the hallway to make the call, and came back into the bedroom to find Nick back in bed, no towel around him, and stroking his cock back to what she had to admit was a nice erection. She was tempted, but thinking about James and about her decision earlier to end the affair, she decided to say no. Nick, she said, making no movement to take her own clothes off, I think it is time to end this. We've had a good run, but you know it could have been James last night. We were lucky that it was actually a bad guy. Let's find some clothes for you and maybe go get some breakfast at a drive-through place. Nick looked at her, thought hard about trying to change her mind, but finally realized she was right. They had been lucky, and there was always another attractive middle-aged mom coming into the dealership. All right, I agree. It's been a good run. So, what about getting you some clothes? It turned out to be more challenging than expected. Nick was 50 pounds heavier and 4 inches taller than James. Polly eventually managed to find a pair of old, ragged sweatpants that somewhat fit Nick after she made some adjustments by cutting V-shaped sections out of the waist. She then improvised a makeshift belt using some tied-together shoelaces to hold up the sweatpants. For a top, she found a sweatshirt that had turned pink due to being washed in the wrong load. She cut off the sleeves and widened the armholes, and Nick had his outfit. Polly almost made a joke about clown attire, but seeing Nick's expression, she just smiled instead. They decided to pass the time by watching TV until it was time to head to Nick's house. James. Earlier that morning, around the time Nick was discovering his missing clothes and car, James pulled into the driveway of the address listed on Nick's driver's license. It was a nice house with a small bicycle leaning against the side of the garage. Sitting in his car for a moment, James pondered, his mind swirling with thoughts, but still no tears. The night in the motel had passed swiftly, and he had gone out for a run at daybreak. Surprisingly, he didn't feel as bad as he expected. Perhaps he was still in shock. Approaching the front door, James carried Nick's wallet with the driver's license visible. He rang the bell, and a young woman, still appearing to be in her 20s, opened the door. She was attractive in a disheveled sort of way. James, wearing his suit from the previous day in New York, a white shirt now wrinkled and no tie, didn't look his best, but he hoped he didn't come across as threatening. He raised Nick's driver's license for the woman to see and gestured towards the gold Mercedes. Before he could speak, she slammed the door shut, but then reopened it a few seconds later, holding up her cell phone. I have 911 dialed on my phone, ready to call, unless you tell me my husband is okay. Ma'am, I have a photo on my phone of your husband and my wife in bed last night, sleeping soundly. Frankly, I don't think your husband is okay, and I don't think my wife is either. If you want to call 911, go right ahead, and I'll just wait in the car. They locked eyes for a moment until her expression softened, and she opened the door to let him in. As she began to say something, they heard a voice from the kitchen, "Mommy." "Wait here, I'll be right back," she said, turning away, presumably heading back to the kitchen, James guessed. He heard voices, hers and at least one child's. She returned with a cup of coffee for him. "I hope you drink it black. I have to get my kids ready for school and then drive them. I'm afraid I trust you right now more than I trust my husband. You can stay here until I get back, and then we'll talk." "Okay." "Fine," James replied. "I'm afraid you and I are in the same boat." He settled into his seat in the living room as the woman and her 2 kids appeared. She introduced him as a friend of their father's and hurried them out the door. James sat there, sipping the mediocre coffee, contemplating calling his office but deciding against it. When the woman returned, she dashed up the stairs off the living room without a word. A few minutes later, she reappeared, looking better with her hair combed and a touch of makeup. She extended her hand to James. As they shook hands, she introduced herself. "Sorry about the chaos earlier. I'm Maggie Peterson, currently married to Nick Peterson, who is currently involved with the woman you're currently married to." James chuckled at her choice of words, finding some relief in laughter. "You're absolutely right about all the currentlys. I'm James Turner, and my wife is currently Polly Turner." He then recounted the events of the previous night, watching as Maggie's tears began to flow. "Polly and I will be getting a divorce, and I'm sure the pictures will help me get a decent settlement. I can send them to your phone if you think you might need them." "Yeah, I suppose I should have them," Maggie replied, her eyes devoid of emotion as she looked at James. He reached for his phone, hesitating when she said, "Wait, don't send them to me. If I see them, I'll never be able to forget. You keep them, and if I need them, I'll call you, right?" "Sure," James agreed, but then added, "I might not be in my current job much longer, and I definitely won't be in my current home. Let me give you my lawyer's name and number. You can always reach him if you need the pictures or any help in a divorce situation." "Okay, thanks," Maggie said. "But what do we do now? Are you returning the car?" "Waiting for Nick to confront him. You saw him. He's a big guy, even if he's gotten a bit out of shape. He was supposed to be in Atlanta yesterday for some car meeting and staying overnight there. He should be back today. You know, I kinda like the car, and I've never driven a Mercedes before. I'm thinking I'll keep it until someone makes me return it. Your husband, or as I like to call him, a troll, may have." Maggie burst out laughing, and James joined in, both in desperate need of any comic relief they could find. "Actually, the car is in my name," Maggie said. "For some tax reason, more depreciation I think, Nick, or should I say Asrol, put it in my name since I drive more than he does." And she paused in thought, then continued, "You know, since I own the car, I can write a permission slip for you to drive it, and the cops can call me to confirm if you get pulled over." James liked that idea, but didn't respond, as Maggie was obviously still formulating a plan. "Also," she began, "there have been numerous break-ins in our neighborhood recently. You have Nick's keys and clothes. If the spare key we keep in the backyard is missing when he arrives, he might attempt to break in. And if our security system is set to instant alert, he could end up drawing some unwanted attention from the police. Maggie, I think I'm falling in love with you all over again. You're amazing. All right, let's not get carried away. Nick might just wait to return until the kids and I are back from school this afternoon. but I can pick them up and take them to the park for a while, giving him more time to get into even more trouble than he'll be in when I catch him. Whatever happens, please keep me informed, especially if he does get into trouble with the police, and call me when you need the car back. I don't want you getting into any trouble." "Will do. Now you need to get out of here, and so do I." James departed in the sleek gold Mercedes, pondering how much one in a better color would cost. Maggie had given him the permission slip, so he assumed she would retrieve the hidden key, set the alarm, and leave for the rest of the day. Polly and Nick. Around noon, Polly dropped Nick off at his house and quickly sped away, as if she wanted to avoid any further interaction. Nick approached his front door with a mixture of hope and dread. He hoped it might be unlocked because Maggie was home, but dreaded the possibility of her being there. Naturally, it was locked, and he hurried around to the backyard, where they usually kept a spare key hidden under a rock. But to his dismay, the rock was missing. "Damn," he muttered, surveying the back of the house, contemplating whether to break in. He attempted the back door, but it was also locked. Realizing he had no other option, he resigned himself to breaking in. He examined the windows along the back, weighing his options. The window into the family room seemed the most viable, being the largest. Breaking it would give him the most space to enter. He snapped off a branch from a tree he'd been meaning to trim and studied the window. Since he was barefoot, he needed a way to break the glass without injuring himself. He dragged 2 chairs from the back deck and placed them next to the window. He figured he could climb over the chairs to avoid the glass, and then proceed cautiously once inside the family room. After a few deep breaths, he steeled himself for what was to come. Nick swung the branch into the family room window, which shattered with a satisfying crash. Unfortunately for him, the sound triggered the wailing alarm of the home security system. Even more unfortunate, a police cruiser happened to be passing down his street, as Maggie had called the local police station earlier to report possible break-ins in the neighborhood. "Damn, damn, damn," Nick muttered under his breath as he hurriedly tried to climb over the chairs to shut off the infuriating security system. But it was too late. "Police, stop right there and back away from the house slowly. Put your hands in the air," a commanding voice rang out. Nick glanced back to see 2 officers, both with their guns drawn. He complied, though he cut his feet slightly as he climbed off the chairs and backed away. "Officers, I can explain," he began, but one of them promptly pulled his hands behind his back and cuffed him. Ignoring Nick's attempt at an explanation, the officer recited his Miranda rights and then asked if he had anything to say. Yes, this is my house, and I don't have my key, so I was breaking in to get some clothes and call my office," Nick blurted out. The officers eyed his sweatsuit outfit, their expressions perhaps suggesting they thought it comical. One of them asked for ID. "No, I don't. You see, I lost my car and all my clothes and stuff, and I just need to get in so I can change," Nick explained hurriedly. "How did you lose your car, sir?" the officer inquired further. "Well, I was staying at a friend's house last night, and this morning the car was gone," Nick replied, feeling the pressure. "Just gone. Did you report the mysterious disappearance? Did you maybe leave it at a bar somewhere?" the officer pressed. Nick was stuck. He didn't want to reveal his whereabouts or why he hadn't reported the car missing, but he also didn't want to end up in jail for trying to break into his own house. And those handcuffs were seriously uncomfortable. Then an idea struck him. "You can call my wife. She can verify my identity, and maybe you could drive me to my office." "I can get some help there to get some clothes," Nick suggested, knowing he'd face a lot of hassle at the car dealership, but it was better than jail or dealing with Maggie's wrath. One of the officers took Maggie's phone number from Nick and walked away to make the call. Nick overheard the officer's side of the conversation. "Ma'am, this is Officer Riles with the Charlotte Police. We're at," he gave the address, "and we have a man here who claims to be your husband. He was trying to break into your house because he lost his clothes, and yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We certainly will." "Thank you, ma'am." The officer turned back to Nick. "The lady says her husband is in Atlanta, and anyone breaking into her house must be a burglar. She hopes we put you in jail and throw away the key." "But but Nick was nearly in tears as the cops escorted him to their cruiser for the ride to the station. Meanwhile, Polly had driven to her office, albeit half a day late, but she would make it up. Still worried about James since she hadn't heard from him, she called his cell phone, but there was no answer. Then she called his office again. "Hi Stacy, Polly here again. I'm getting a little worried about James since I still haven't heard from him." "Have you?" "No, I haven't. I suppose that means he's still in New York with the lawyers, but it's really unlike him not to have called. You sound a bit worried, so I'll call up there and check on him. Either he or I will call you back in a few minutes, okay?" "Thanks, Stacy. You're the best secretary in the world." A few minutes later, Polly received a call back. "Polly, it's Stacy. I spoke to one of the secretaries in the law office, and she said James left late yesterday, hoping to catch the last flight down to Charlotte. So I called James's cell phone to check on him. I did speak with him, and he asked me to tell you he would call you later." "Okay." "Thank you, Stacy, thank you," said Polly as she disconnected. A snake started growing in the pit of her stomach. James ended his call with Stacy and disconnected. He was behind the wheel of his gold Mercedes en route to meet a new lawyer. This attorney came highly recommended by Fred Thomas, his trusted business lawyer of many years. James hoped he could place a similar level of trust in this new divorce lawyer. "Mr. Turner, please take a seat. Ms. Coleman will be with you shortly," the receptionist informed him as he entered the lawyer's office. He settled into a chair, finding some solace in the office's decor, not extravagantly lavish, but certainly not cheap. Before he could dwell further on his thoughts, a woman in her 50s, with dyed red hair and a sturdy frame, entered the reception area. "Mr. Turner," James stood and nodded. "I'm Jenny Coleman. Fred asked me to take good care of you. Let's step into my office and discuss your situation." James followed her into a tastefully furnished office, accepted a cup of coffee from the receptionist, and began recounting his story, discovering his wife's infidelity, his desire for a divorce, and his need to safeguard his assets, particularly the proceeds from the sale of his and his sister's company. He chose not to mention the Mercedes, though he suspected Jenny might find it amusing. "James, may I call you that?" He nodded, and she continued, "I'm Jenny. Here's the relatively good news, given your circumstances. Fred informed me that you and your sisters owned your company prior to your marriage, so your shares are considered separate property. This means your wife has no claim to your company shares or the sale proceeds. However, it's crucial to keep these shares and proceeds separate from any joint accounts you have with your wife. Understand?" James nodded, absorbing the information. "I think I understand, but what about our house, retirement accounts, and things like that?" "Well, the news isn't as good for you there. Since your income is significantly higher than hers, you'll be paying alimony for a few years. We might be able to forego touching your retirement accounts by increasing the alimony. I know it's not ideal, but dealing with some short-term discomfort now is better than risking having to split your retirement savings down the line. As for your kids, since they're in college, there's no need for child support. Are you okay with covering the rest of their college expenses?" "Yeah, that's fine. And what about the house?" "You and your wife will need to decide. You can either sell it and divide the proceeds, or one of you can buy out the other based on the current appraised value." "After what I witnessed last night, I definitely don't want the house. I doubt Polly can afford to buy my half, so I suppose that means selling." "All right, I can prepare the paperwork accordingly. The divorce petition is fairly standard, so I can have it ready for your review tomorrow, early if you prefer, so we can have her served by tomorrow afternoon. Then we can work on a proposed settlement agreement next week." "That's pretty fast. Mr. Turner, James, listen to me. If there's a chance for you and your wife, if counseling or just some time might..." No, it's just the shock I'm dealing with. Less than 24 hours ago, I was happy, eager to get home to my wife, share the good news about selling the company. And now I'm here discussing divorce filings. But go ahead. I'll figure out how to handle it." "All right, but if you change your mind, just give me a call, and we can make adjustments." James expressed his gratitude, paid a retainer, and exited her office. As he made his way back to the gold Mercedes, he couldn't shake off thoughts about the jerk he had seen the previous night. This reminded him that he had promised his secretary he would call Polly. Polly. Hello, Polly greeted as she answered her phone in her law firm office. Polly, it's James. You called, looking for me. Oh, James, thank you for calling. I've missed you. Are you? Where are you? I'm here in Charlotte, Polly. When did you get back? That familiar sensation of dread coiled in her stomach. Last night, Polly, I got back last night, and the dread tightened its grip. Polly sank back into her chair. She knew she had to keep this conversation going, but she could barely breathe, let alone speak. Polly, I'm hanging up now. No, James, no, she managed to squeak out. Please, can we meet somewhere? I need to see you and just be with you for a few minutes. James hesitated. This woman had been his love, the mother of his daughters, the most important person in his life for more than 20 years. Okay, Polly, Center Cafe at 6. The dread intensified. Polly had to agree, but Center Cafe held memories, where she and James had first met, both of them out with friends. It had become a special place for them over the years, and now she feared why James had suggested it, but she had to agree. James, I'll see you there, and please listen. I'm sorry, and I love you. James hung up. Polly sat there, tears flowing, the dread tightening its grip even more. Polly arrived at the cafe early, James not yet in sight. She ordered a glass of wine and sat, consumed by self-loathing. Her first real experiences had been with big, strong college soccer players. With them, she felt like a helpless victim, and oddly, she loved it. But when James came into her life, she decided she was done with feeling helpless. James was everything she needed. Strong, loving, a great father to their daughters, a good provider. Everything except for the occasional intrusive thought about one of those soccer players. That alone might have been manageable, if not for the recent flight to Charlotte from the West Coast. James had been visiting a pharmaceutical company trying to sell a new drug, and she had accompanied him for a getaway weekend before his meeting started. Flying back alone on an overnight flight, she had been seated next to a big man, a coach, as it turned out, for the local NFL team. They chatted, had too many drinks, and she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, only to wake up in his arms. Reflecting on that night now, she realized she should have screamed or at least pushed his hand away. But no, Polly hadn't. The flight landed, and they headed straight to the nearest motel. As for guilt, she didn't remember feeling guilty, just relieved that James wouldn't return until later that week, giving her time to recover. The coach had only stayed in Charlotte for one season, and perhaps Polly would have returned to being a faithful wife if he hadn't introduced her to an offensive lineman on the practice squad before he left. Not a star, not even a starter, but just as strong and dominating in bed as the coach had been. Polly was almost thankful when he was traded away. She wanted to remain faithful to James, and guilt finally started to surface. Polly thought she was over her cheating by the time their girls left for college. She dearly loved James, and she enjoyed the extra time they had for just the two of them with the girls gone. But that snake of temptation reared its head whenever James did something nice for her. Like when he told her it was time for her to get a new car, a luxury car that she should choose. Unfortunately, she chose to go to the Mercedes dealership, where she met Nick Peterson. He didn't sell her a Mercedes, but he certainly knew how to push all the right buttons to get her into bed. She knew it was wrong, because Nick wasn't all that great. He was big and strong, and she liked him, but James was better at everything. It was also wrong simply because it was wrong. She had gotten away with previous affairs and had thought her marriage was intact. But now, she and James loved each other more than ever, and she wanted to be faithful. It was the right thing to do, not to have an affair with a big oaf. Letting Nick spend the night in her marital bed had been a terrible mistake, even if James hadn't discovered them. But she had let him, and now she was terrified of the terrible price she might have to pay. "Hello, Polly," James greeted as Polly looked up to see him standing there. He appeared noticeably older than when he had left for New York, and she couldn't help but feel responsible for that. The familiar sensation of unease slithered in her belly. "Hi, James. Thank you for being here. I don't even know where to begin in expressing how sorry I am. May I ask you some questions? He said, taking a seat. Oh, James, please no. If we have any chance, questions and answers will just destroy it. James, we should escape, just for a few days, to some island in the Caribbean, where we can reconnect, hold each other, where... Polly, please, don't be delusional. If you can't answer my questions, I'll leave now. The snake kept biting, but Polly knew she had to endure that pain and let James vent. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could move past his anger towards reconciliation. Okay, James, ask me anything. Do you know what time I got home last night? It was a peculiar question, she thought. No, not exactly. It had to be after. She stopped herself. She knew what his next question would be, and it was, and do you know what I saw when I got home, when I walked upstairs to our bedroom, or I should say, what used to be our bedroom? Yes, James, I understand what you must have seen, and I know it must have been one of the most terrible things you've ever witnessed, and I know it's entirely my fault. Please just hear me out. James, I am so sorry enough that I won't contest any divorce you want. If you want to yell at me, you can do it right here, and I won't protest. If you want to... Shut up, Polly. Next question. How many men since we got married? If you lie, if I even suspect you're lying, I'm leaving. Polly's initial instinct was to lie. Her second thought was that lying was too risky, and her third thought was that her marriage was likely already over. 3, James, just 3 men that I wish I'd never met. I can see in your eyes that our marriage is finished, and I accept that. You deserve someone better than me. I'm willing to do almost anything for another chance, but I understand if you want nothing more to do with me. Get a lawyer, Polly. You'll be served with divorce papers tomorrow. James stood and walked away. Polly sat there, too stunned to cry at first. As she processed James's words, the snake in her gut bit hard, and tears finally came. James. James left the cafe, reminiscing about how he and Polly first met there decades ago. He wondered if this recent meeting would mark the end of any meaningful conversation between them. Intimacy, he thought bitterly, the cruelest kind. Hearing your wife admit she's seeing other men. And seeing her with that toad Nick in our bed, asleep, her snoring for God's sake. How could I ever move past that? Maybe he could have dealt with 3 anonymous affairs over their 20-plus years together, with counseling and lots of apologies on her part. Maybe. But he couldn't shake that image from their bed. Their marriage was finished, and as he sat in that cursed gold Mercedes, he finally let himself cry. As darkness fell, James realized how late it was. He blew his nose, wiped his face, and thought about what Maggie Peterson had said earlier, though it felt like ages ago. She had warned him not to send her pictures of Polly with her husband. She knew forgiveness would be much harder if faced with visual proof. James decided to call her to share his thoughts and check on the Mercedes. Hello? Maggie answered her home phone. Maggie, it's James Turner from earlier today. I just wanted to check in on how you're doing and see what I should do with the car. James, thanks for calling. I'm managing, I suppose. You can hang onto the car for now. Nick's in a heap of trouble, so he won't be needing it anytime soon. Trouble? I hope you didn't resort to drastic measures. No, but he might be wishing I did. He got himself arrested for trying to break into our house, and apparently he took a swing at one of the officers. You know how big he is. The cop ended up tasering him. Then something happened while he was in jail. He won't talk about it, but I suspect he may have been assaulted by another inmate. I refused to speak with him, and he eventually had to call his brother to bail him out. Now his whole family knows what's happened. Wow. Maggie, I can't say I feel sorry for him, but I am sorry for what you're going through. I want to commend you on your decision this morning not to look at those pictures of him and my wife. If there's any chance of reconciliation, those images would only complicate things further. Yeah, he finally arrived home a couple of hours ago, in tears, apologizing and begging me to let him stay, at least for now. You know we have 2 young kids, so I'm going to try to work through this, but it won't be smooth sailing for him. His own brother, who's a lawyer, advised me to insist on a post-nup agreement, and he offered to help with it. Plus, I'll be managing our finances, at least for the time being. Nick is going to be closely watched, and I won't hesitate to rein him in. Good for you, girl. I wish you all the best, and when you need the car back, just let me know. They ended the call, and James sat there, feeling a tinge of envy towards Maggie. Perhaps Nick had finally learned his lesson. Getting arrested and facing an assault charge for attempting to hit a policeman, along with whatever he went through in jail, might have straightened him out. James hoped so, for Maggie's and their children's sake. He eventually drove back to the motel where he was staying. He had one more task before attempting to sleep, calling his daughters, Judy and Julia. "Hi, Daddy," Judy, he presumed, answered. They were twins, fraternal, not identical, but they might as well have been. They sounded alike, attended the same very expensive college, studying the same thing, nursing. At least they didn't look completely alike. They were close and obviously sisters, but not so obviously twins. James often admitted, only to himself, that he was glad they weren't identical. They were experts at teaming up on him, and he thought it would be even worse if two identical young women were working him to get a car, permission to stay out late, money for a trip to Florida for spring break, whatever the daddy please request of the day was. But he also admitted, again only to himself, that he loved to spoil them. "Judy," he replied. "Yep, you got it." Of course, it was a 50-50th chance. "What's up?" "Listen, tomorrow is Saturday, and I'd like to take you and your sister out for brunch. Well, let's call it brunch, maybe around 11 o'clock. At that bistro on 4th Street where we've been before." That sounds good to me. Hold on a sec." He could hear noises in the background, then she was back. "And it's good with Julia too, can we?" He quickly cut her off, remembering their last brunch had included 6 or 7 of their friends. "Let's just make it the 3 of us tomorrow, okay?" "Sure," Judy replied, "but tell me what's..." Once again, he interrupted, not wanting to have a difficult conversation over the phone that would be better in person. "Listen, I need to run. See you at 11. Love you, and tell your sister I love her too. Bye," and he hung up. He hoped she wouldn't call Polly, but he couldn't have told her that. She would have called Polly right away. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning would come quickly enough. Polly. After James departed from the cafe, leaving her with his advice, warning, or perhaps a curse, Polly found it difficult to stop her tears. She realized she had ruined everything: her marriage, her family, her entire life. She knew her daughters would eventually find out, her parents, all her friends. She would likely lose her home and even James himself. Poor James, to have walked in on her in bed, naked, probably with that damned Nick sporting an erection. The image must have shattered James, and Polly's tears flowed unabated. A waitress finally approached and inquired if she needed to move to the ladies' room. Polly stifled her sobs and managed a weak "no, thank you." She settled the bill and left, heading towards the place that soon wouldn't be her home anymore. Upon arrival, she found some gin, but the quantity was all wrong. Not enough to knock her out, but too much to help her rationalize how to win James back. After she consumed it all, it did help her fall asleep, clinging to a hope for some sort of miracle to bring James back to her. James and his daughters. At 11 the next morning, James sat in the bistro, waiting for his daughters to arrive. Earlier that morning, he had reviewed and approved the draft divorce petition, then driven 2 hours from Charlotte, contemplating how to break the news to Judy and Julia. As they walked in, he prepared himself for the difficult conversation ahead. After the usual greetings and small talk, James finally broached the subject. "Girls, I have something important to tell you," he began. "It's not about illness or anything physical, but it's not good news either." Julia, perceptive as always, jumped in. "Is it about Mom? Did she do something?" James sighed, steeling himself. "Yes, it's about your mom. She cheated on me." Judy's reaction was immediate. "Oh my God, is she running off with someone from her firm? Some young guy?" The absurdity momentarily lightened the mood, but James' somber expression quickly brought them back to reality. "Daddy, no, not Mom," Julia choked out, tears welling in her eyes. James took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Girls, listen carefully. Yes, your mom has cheated on me, but it doesn't mean she's cheated on you." Julia's voice trembled as she responded, "But if her cheating is tearing our family apart, then she's cheating on all of us." Tears streamed down all their faces as they tried to comfort each other, realizing the painful truth of Julia's words. They embraced, clinging to each other for support in the face of their shattered family. "Dad, let's leave," Judy suggested. "There's a park a couple of blocks away. We'll have more privacy there." Sensing the stares, James swiftly settled the bill, and they made their way to the park, Judy and Julia flanking him, all holding onto each other. "Tell us, Daddy," Judy said as they settled on a bench. "We deserve to know how bad this is." "She's right," Julia added. "We're old enough to handle it." "On my way here, I struggled with what to say," James began. "I agree, you're both grown up, and yes, your mom did cheat on all of us. I'm afraid I found her in our bed at home with another man, and she later admitted there had been others before him. I'm still in shock, but I know your mom and I can't recover from this. I've already spoken to a divorce lawyer, and your mom will be served with divorce papers later today." Tears welled up, and then there was silence as they all absorbed the news and contemplated their futures. "Girls, as difficult as this situation is, your priority needs to be yourselves and your schoolwork. There's enough money to cover your senior year here at Duke, and if either or both of you want to pursue graduate studies, I believe I can find the funds for that too. But there's a condition attached." Both girls looked at him, curious about what he meant. "I'm happy to support your education, but I expect hard work and good grades from both of you. Yes, what your mom has done makes focusing on school harder, but you've told me you're adults, and real adults, mature and disciplined people, can handle adversity like this. Right?" They glanced at each other, tears welling up as they hugged him again. "Yes, Daddy, you're the best, and we absolutely, positively won't let you down," Julia reassured him, while Judy appeared pensive. "Daddy, Julia's right, we won't let you down. But what about you? Are you going to be okay? What are you going to do?" "Well, you can do a lot of thinking during a 2-hour drive. First, I want both of you to know that what you've said doesn't surprise me one bit. I know you'll continue to excel in school, and I'll always be proud of you. As for me, what your mom has done has really knocked me down. I could hide away, wallow in self-pity, try to find a way to reconcile with your mom. But I realized that's not taking care of me. All my adult life, I've been taking care of other people. I started working at your grandparents' company, looking after them. Then, after they passed away, I took care of my sisters since they owned interests in the company. Then there's your mom, and of course, taking care of you guys. It might sound like I'm complaining, but I'm not really. The company will be sold soon, which relieves me of my responsibilities to my sisters. Polly is gone, and you guys. I promise I'm happy to take care of you, to help you start your adult lives. So that's 2 out of 3 in terms of women in my life. Not bad at all. That leaves me, and you know what? I'm looking at this whole cheating and divorce thing not as the worst thing in my life, but as a chance for a new life. A whole new life devoted to taking care of one person, me. Okay. Dad, really? I mean, if you really mean what you're saying, that's great," said Julia, hopeful. Judy was a little more skeptical. "Dad, what does all that really mean? A new life? What, working for another pharma company? Buying a farm? What?" "That's a great question, and I've got a solid answer. No specifics yet, but this new chapter is going to be all about physicality. Running marathons, scaling mountains, sailing across the Atlantic, trekking the Alps, embarking on safaris. There's a world of possibilities out there, and you know what? Along the way, I might just meet a fascinating woman, someone who shares my adventurous spirit. Who knows?" "Wow, Dad, that's incredible." Both girls stared at him, astonished. This was their dad, not some daring explorer. "Did you really come up with all this on the drive from Charlotte?" Judy asked. "Well, partly yes, but also I haven't slept much, and my mind's been racing, brainstorming different ideas. I could easily drown my sorrows in a bottle, but instead, I'm choosing to make the most out of this situation. Trust me, I'm going to be all right." With more hugs, kisses, and a few more tears, James bid farewell to his daughters, heading back to Charlotte in the gold Mercedes. Polly and the daughters. After James departed, the girls immediately called their mother. The phone was answered by a scratchy voice at the Turners' residence. Putting the call on speaker, Julia began, "Mom, it's Julia and Judy. Daddy just informed us about something terrible during our brunch." Their mother responded, "What did he tell you?" Julia continued, "Well, the word divorce came up, and he mentioned that your infidelity was the reason. Dad provided more details, but essentially, that's the gist of it. Is it true?" Their mother hesitated before replying, "It's complicated. Your father and I have been married for so long, and this mistake, yes, I've made a mistake, well, more than one. But we can work through this. I just need to give your dad some time to." Julia interjected, "Mom, listen. Dad mentioned divorce. He wasn't talking about fixing a mistake. He was talking about infidelity." Their mother responded, "Yes, technically, he's right, but that doesn't mean we can't fix this. I told him I would do anything." Judy cut in, "Mom, I think he may be in denial. Dad said he consulted a divorce lawyer. It seems like he doesn't see a way back for both of you." Julia, and I don't want to choose sides, but you need to face the reality. There was a strained silence on the other end of the line as Julia and Judy exchanged concerned looks. Did they need to make the drive to Charlotte? Polly finally spoke, barely above a whisper, "I know. I know I've made a mess, destroyed my marriage. I think your dad hates me, and he's right to feel that way. I've done terrible things. Your dad told me to get a lawyer, and he's right about that too. I'm sorry, girls. I understand this is difficult for you as well." "Mom, don't worry about us," Julia reassured her. "We'll be okay, and I believe Dad is handling things the best he can. You need to focus on yourself. Getting a lawyer is a good step. Judy and I can drive over to Charlotte if you need us." "Thank you, girls. That means a lot. I'll manage. I just need some time to come to terms with my actions." The call ended, leaving the girls uncertain of their next move. "You know," remarked Julia, "it's ironic, in a sad way, how we're more concerned about Mom, who caused this mess, than we are about Dad." They continued their discussion, eventually deciding to give their parents space to sort things out without interference from their daughters. Polly sat in her Charlotte home, feeling a bit hungover from gin the previous night and deeply despondent after speaking with her daughters. She knew she should get up, get dressed, and do something productive. "Do something," she urged herself. Just then, the doorbell rang, distracting her from thoughts of another round of gin. When Polly opened the door, she was greeted by a young woman who was visibly chewing gum. "Can I help you?" Polly inquired. "Yes, ma'am. Are you Polly Turner, the wife of James Turner?" "Why, yes, I am." "Why do you ask?" Polly questioned. "Ma'am, you have been served," the woman stated as she handed Polly a folder of documents and took a photo of her. "What? What?" Polly stammered as the woman retreated to her car. Returning inside, Polly sat at the kitchen table and cautiously opened the folder. As she read the title of the first document, Petition for Divorce, Polly felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Recalling James's parting words, "Get a lawyer," she knew that their marriage was irreparably damaged. Sitting in the familiar kitchen they once shared, Polly understood that there was no way back from the mistakes she had made. The future. Polly's infidelity had indeed taken its toll on her marriage with James. 6 years later, seated in the grand ballroom of a luxurious hotel, she watched Judy twirl around with her new spouse, lost in memories of the past. When her daughters were teenagers, Polly had believed life was unbearable, with a flurry of activities, teenage drama, and her perception of boys as either too mean or too kind. James was always occupied. Her paralegal work felt tedious, and life seemed overwhelming at the time. Now she longed for those chaotic days. Despite still working at the same law firm, drowning in mundane paperwork, she yearned for something more. "Polly, here's your wine," Simon, her date, offered as he approached. Simon was a kind, middle-aged lawyer attending Judy's wedding with her. "Your daughter looks stunning, just like her mother." "Thank you, Simon. You're too kind, and thanks for the wine," Polly replied with a smile. Simon was a pleasant man, and she could picture herself settling down with him if he so desired. However, he wasn't James. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on James, who had recently returned from a climbing expedition in Nepal. He exuded a bronzed, godlike aura, appearing more handsome and fit than she remembered. He shared laughter and warmth with Julia and her partner, holding hands with a stunning and athletic woman by his side. Julia had mentioned that James had met this woman during another climbing excursion in South America, and they had been exploring and climbing together for months. The mere thought made Polly nauseous. Polly. Simon's voice pulled Polly out of her daze. Yes, Simon, she responded. Polly, I think it's time we leave. Your duties as the mother of the bride have been fulfilled, and staying here fixated on your ex-husband isn't healthy for either of us. It's not conducive to whatever relationship is blossoming between us, Simon gently suggested. Simon, you're so thoughtful, and you're absolutely right. Let me bid farewell to my daughters, and we'll make our exit, Polly agreed. She embraced and kissed her daughters, offered her best wishes to the newlyweds, and made a conscious effort to ignore James and his attractive companion. James caught a glimpse of Polly as she made her way out of the ballroom, stirring a pang of nostalgia for their past. Julia interrupted his thoughts with a question. Sorry, Julia, what were you saying? James inquired. Daddy, do you remember that odd gold Mercedes you drove to have brunch with Judy and me at Duke that morning? Julia asked curiously. Whatever happened to that car? Ah, Julia, that's a long tale I won't bore you with. I borrowed that peculiar gold Mercedes from a friend and eventually returned it to her. I believe she sold it. It was indeed a car plagued by bad luck, James explained before turning back to his climbing companion, discussing their upcoming mountain adventure. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.